So, since the show decided to give us a little bit of downtime with a really low-key episode followed by a week break before the big 4-part finale, I thought that I'd hold off putting together my next super big theory until next week and go with something a little simpler, a little more chill. Something topical, since it happened to be inspired by the most recent episode, and which is also time-sensitive, since as soon as the finale airs, we'll know the answer to this question. And that question is, how is it that Bismuth and possibly Greg and Peridot and Lapis going to get to Homeworld to get Steven the backup that he needs? There have been a few theories regarding how this is going to go down floating around, and I do definitely think that some are more likely than others. So I decided to take the bridge module of my new ship. That is what this is, by the way. It's the detachable bridge module for my new ship. I know some of you guys were wondering about that. Out for a leisurely fly and go over each theory one after another and talk about what I feel works and what I feel doesn't. First of all, the one that I think is the least credible overall, but also probably the most fun and the one that I wish was more likely, is the theory that Bismuth will somehow outfit Greg's van to be able to fly all the way to Homeworld. Whether or not this happens, I think, is going to depend very much on how seriously the crew wants to take this big finale event, and I do think they want to take it pretty seriously. So while I would love to see Greg literally drive his van into White Diamond's literal heart in order to save his son, I don't think it's going to happen. It just pushes the suspension of disbelief a little too much to assume that Bismuth, a gem who built structures and weapons, can convert something which was not by any stretch of the imagination designed to be space-worthy into something that's space-worthy. Even assuming that she uses parts from the broken diamond ships and she gets help from Peridot, who would theoretically reform in the interim, I just don't see this as being a likely outcome. It sucks, because I'd love to see it, but I just don't think it's going to happen. But I did bring up Blue and Yellow's destroyed ships. Those are still there, or at least the wreckage of them is, and they're not entirely broken to pieces. They are somewhat intact, or at least they were last time we saw them. There are definitely large chunks of them which seem to be in more or less one piece, so it stands to reason that some of the tech on those ships is viable for use. So once again, especially if we assume that Peridot reforms in the interim, it is theoretically possible that they could build an entirely new ship out of those scraps, at least one sufficient to get them where they're going, because I mean, once they're there and saves Steven, he can just use his giant pink ass to get them home. In theory, anyway. Still, this seems like it would take a really long time, and I don't expect there to be a large passage of time between when Bismuth gets that message and when she shows up to help Steven. I just think the story is going to go too fast for that to be possible. So I also consider this one to be pretty unlikely, though there is another similar theory which I find a little more likely that it is worth going over, and that's that Lapis might reform in the interim and might be able to move Bismuth and maybe even Peridot and Greg, if he decides to go to Homeworld for some incredibly stupid reason, all the way to Homeworld the same way that she moved the barn to the moon. Like, yeah, we don't know for sure that she can move at her ludicrous speed while she's dragging another object, but I don't see any reason to assume that she can't. Her powers are pretty insane anyway when it comes to spaceflight capabilities. But even if she can't, even if they can't cobble together some vessel for her to drag along with her, there is still a solution. Let's assume that Peridot hasn't reformed yet as all this is happening, but they still want to take her along to Homeworld for some reason. Well, obviously, Lapis could just carry her, and if Bismuth poofs herself or allows herself to be poofed, Lapis could carry her too, and then she could just reform once she gets there. Then there's also the possibility that, again, especially if Peridot reforms in the interim between the two episodes, that they might be able to repair and make use of the galaxy warp. And here we have one of the more immediate methods of Steven's backup crystal gems to get to Homeworld, and therefore one that I feel is far more likely than the ones that I've gone over so far. We don't know 100% that the galaxy warp literally takes them to, like, the actual Homeworld and not just Homeworld-controlled space, but again, it has always only been said that the galaxy warp, the main warp at the galaxy warp, takes you to Homeworld, so I see no reason to assume that it doesn't literally do that. We also know that at some point Peridot had access to those flask robinoids which could repair things. Even if she doesn't have access to them anymore, it's possible that she could whip up the substance that they carried and repair the galaxy warp at least well enough to get them where they need to go. Or maybe Bismuth, someone who has experience with gem structures, could repair it on her own. Maybe that's just something that she can do. However, the theory that I think is the most likely, just because it would serve to bring all of these characters associated with this Homeworld plot all together at once, is the theory that they will somehow utilize the connection between Lynes and Lars to get to Homeworld. Or more specifically, though, utilize that connection to get to Lars' ship and get him to turn around and take them to Homeworld on his ship. This does presuppose that either Greg or Bismuth would have the presence of mind to come up with this idea in the first place, and it also presumes that Lars and his crew have gotten his engine working properly since the last time we saw him, or either Bismuth or Peridot is able to help him to get the engine functioning once they get there. But those are all pretty minor plot contrivances. I think we can assume that those things are possible. We just have to assume that Steven detailed how the connection between Lynes and Lars works to either Greg or Bismuth, that with Steven in such clear danger and asking for help, Lynes will let these other people into his headspace, and that, again, someone will be present who has the technical skills to get the engine working. I pointed out in my review of Escapism that it was odd that Steven didn't even try to contact Lars, but maybe, narratively speaking, this is the reason why, because they intended to bring Lars and his off-colors, by extension, into this narrative in a different way. Now, I don't really think that he and his off-colors would participate, really, beyond dropping the reinforcements off and then maybe shooting some stuff with lasers and maybe picking them up after the fact. But I do think that this is a really reasonable way that we might assume that Bismuth will get where she needs to go. And again, since it brings so many important characters together all at once, I think from a narrative standpoint at least, this one is the most likely to happen. Though frankly, I think any of these could technically work, except the van one, that one's just goofy. That none of them really suspend disbelief too much that I wouldn't buy that they could work. So any of them could be possible, again, except for the van one. Or the crew could surprise us and Bismuth might get to Homeworld in a completely different way. I can't think of what that way might possibly be, and I haven't uploaded my helper AI Karen to this ship yet to help me come up with additional ideas, but it is still possible. I guess what I'm saying is I'm really looking forward to seeing how Bismuth gets to Homeworld to back up Steven, and whether or not she brings Lapis and Peridot, and whether or not they're already reformed by the time they get there. Because I do think that backup is going to come in some way, shape, or form. But as per usual, guys, I'd like to know, what did you think of any of the ideas that I presented in this theory compilation? Do you have your own ideas that I didn't touch on here? And just for good measure, are you excited to see how all of this plays out as well? Let's get a discussion going in the comments section down below or over on my Discord, link in the description. But either way, this has been AJ22 and I will talk to you guys later.